Okay, he's the columnist for Savage Love and host of the Savage Lovecast podcast. Dan Savage.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Great. And you're in Seattle?
Yeah, I'm up in Seattle in my office.
Of course, it doesn't matter. We're all locked away. We're starting to come out again. But I want to ask you about your column because I'm just very curious what people are writing right now. You must have a lot of people who have changed the subject to, excuse me, to what do I do in this crisis? How do I hook up? I'm alone, whatever it is. What is like the number one query you're getting?
The number one seems to be permission slips. People want to carve out an exception that applies just for them, to sneak out of the house, to leave the people they're quarantining with, and go fuck somebody. And sometimes it's go fuck somebody in addition to the person at home that they've been sleeping with. And that's just, too risky. I've had some readers get angry with me because, I'm a gay guy and I'm in my 50s, and at the height of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, I took risks for love and sex and intimacy and connection. But, back then, if you went out and took a calculated risk and had anal sex with somebody, you didn't go home that night and have anal sex with your mother. So you didn't put anybody else that you were living with at risk. It was a risk that was all yours. And in this case with sex, if you're close enough to someone to have sex with them, unless your penis is 6 foot 6 inches long, if you're close enough to have sex with them, they're breathing on you, and you're going to go home and breathe on people that you're living with. And so you're not just taking a risk yourself, you're putting everybody else in your orbit, everybody else you're sheltering with, at risk as well, and that's not right or fair.
Do you live with your mother?
Not anymore, but in the mid 80s, when I was a sexually active young gay man, I did.
Then why
I was taking risks, but they were mine alone. I wasn't putting anybody else at risk who also wasn't a sex partner of mine.
I know, but if you're not living with your mother, if she's not in the house and then you're controlled not to go see your mother.
Yeah, the theory is that by traversing the city to get to somebody, that could be a risk. As restrictions are eased a bit, it may be possible to bring more people into your pod, to a limited number of people that you are connected with. Human beings are social animals, we're also sexual animals, and people will go insane without touch, insane without sex. Eventually, we're going to have to figure out a way to finesse this. But at this moment, right now, with the cases still rising, it just is a little too risky, I think, to contemplate bringing more people into your pod, and the kind of rationalizations people make when they're thinking with their dicks or thinking with their pussies to allow for what it is they want, as opposed to what is safe, not just for them as an individual, but for everybody else in their orbit.
So do you ever worry people will get too used to this? And look, we've always had non-contact sex. I mean, I remember phone sex started like in the 80s. I've never done it. I would burst out laughing. I just think it's ridiculous. But
I think you're going to see more people experimenting with online sex. You're definitely seeing that. Not only are you seeing that, I think the stigma attached to it is falling away. Even before COVID-19, 40%, the plurality of opposite sex couples were now meeting online, first contact online. It was 80% of same-sex couples and higher. And it's just accelerating that trend. Now people are meeting online, and that's a good thing. That people were meeting online, because when you enter an online dating space or hookup space, you're saying to everybody else in that space, you can approach me. There's not going to be any misunderstanding if you approach me at this moment and hit on me. And this is just, giving more people who weren't yet already doing that a push. And you're seeing a lot more, not phone sex, Skype sex. You're seeing a lot more, much to the consternation of Zoom, people having sex on Zoom, despite Zoom's service agreement that doesn't allow people to be sexual on Zoom, but people are doing it anyway. Because sex is powerful and people will do it, and people will use whatever tools are at hand. And right now, the safest way to have sex with somebody who isn't a person that you're living with is to meet them on the internet and have sex with them there.
But meeting is not sex. I can't believe I have to say this to you, Dan. Meeting is not sex. And, doing anything when they're not in the same room, you call it whatever you want. It's not sex. I'm not advocating that you go out and do something risky right now. That's not the point of this. I'm just asking about the future, and like the Gen Z generation. I know they think if they're just talking to somebody a lot and they have never met them, they'll call that dating. I find that disturbing.
I don't understand that either. I get questions all the time at my column and my podcast from people who say, I've been with my boyfriend for 10 months. We've never actually met. And I don't think that it's a relationship until you've actually met. And the advice used to be don't direct message for someone for too long before that first meeting. So you never know if you're going to click in person and really click chemically. And if you, really make a huge emotional investment in somebody online and then you meet them and you don't click, you're going to be devastated, or they're going to be devastated if you're not into them. And so the advice was always, get together for that first coffee after, a day or two of swapping messages. Don't draw it out for weeks or months. But now we're in a situation where we have to turn that advice on its head. And I know cyber sex isn't IRL sex, it's not real life sex, it's not skin to skin contact sex, and that is what people need. But in the absence of that, kind of is the next best thing. It's like cyber sex. Sex is in the name. It's not what you think of when somebody says sex, but I still think it counts.
Well, I'm glad to hear we're still going to have actual sex.
We will have actual sex.
Okay,
And until about a half an hour ago, I was going to predict sort of the golden age of glory holes might return because
oh,
initial tests showed that there wasn't a virus in semen or vaginal secretion. So if you could, carve a hole in the wall and get people together and then power wash that wall with the hole in it in between uses, maybe people could have sex that way and glory holes would come roaring back and they wouldn't just be for creepy closeted priests and truck stops anymore. But a new study just out of China actually did find the coronavirus in the semen of people who had recovered from corona infection. So the jury is still out on whether or not swapping fluids, even for people who've recovered from corona, is going to be safe.
well, okay.
I know that's a bummer, isn't it? I'm sad.
You're the expert, but I'm going to pass on the whole glory hole thing. So, who do you think this has been tougher on? Single people who are alone, completely alone, or people who are married or living together and now they're cooped up with someone and they're driving each other nuts and it's turned sour. What do you think is worse, loneliness or I guess it's the individual?
I actually don't think it's a competition. I think there are people out there who are alone and very hurt and upset. Maybe even people who began dating before this hit and are now separated or separated by an ocean or a continent from their partner, and they have no way of knowing when they're going to get back together again, and those folks are miserable. And there are a lot of people who are confined with their spouses. And in some cases, what we saw in cities in China after restrictions were lifted was not a baby boom or a lot of people emerging pregnant. What we saw was a lot of people rushing to get divorces. And my concern is, one of the things that makes a relationship work is time apart built into that relationship. There's studies that show that couples who vacation separately occasionally have different social circles are stronger and they last longer. And suddenly that couple where what helped that relationship work was that structured time apart built into the relationship, they're suddenly thrown together in the same place 24 hours a day, and they may be misinterpreting the stress and conflict in the relationship as a sign that it doesn't work and they need to get out of it, as opposed to this doesn't work. These circumstances don't work for this relationship. And I'm afraid some people may end relationships when this is over that they shouldn't end.
Wait, so let me sure if I understand the answer. So you're saying being alone is the worst one?
No, I'm saying it's not a competition. Like, there are people who are alone and miserable. There are people who are
Right.
being thrown together with spouses that maybe they barely liked or were thinking about leaving in the first place, or spouses that they like and the relationship is good. It's just this pressure of, in this, alien circumstance where you have to be with somebody 24 hours a day is putting a strain on the relationship that may convince someone they need to get out of it. When what they actually need to
Right.
do is just find a way, even if you're in the same place, to get away from each other every once in a while.
Yeah, that's a tough thing for a lot of people right now. So I thought this was really interesting. I saw it in the paper yesterday. 45% of husbands say they are doing the majority of the homeschooling of the children, and 3% of the wives agree. What do you?
Yeah, that bears out across multiple studies about housework and taking care of children, where the husbands overestimate the amount that they're doing, and maybe the wives underestimate it a bit. But yeah, men tend to think they're doing more than they actually are
And how
in
is
almost
this?
all areas.
Has this been positive for your relationship?
Yeah, I shouldn't complain, but I do. So obviously I can. But Terry and I are very fortunate, and then we have like a nice big house, and we have a kind of a skill, I think, that was always there, which I've always said was a good thing about a relationship, is we've always been really good at being alone together, that we can be in the same room and he can be reading a book and I can be working, and we can just leave each other alone. We don't, there are couples who feel like if you're not staring into each other's eyes at every moment that you're physically in the same space, there's something wrong with your relationship. And Terry and I have always been very good at ignoring each other when we needed to.
Well said. All right. Well, I'm glad you're well, and I look forward to seeing you sometime
I look
again.
forward to seeing you
when I
again
can...
soon. I'm glad you're well, and best wishes to everybody in the Real Time family. And I hope we come through this all right.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. Be well.